Module number 10, the senses. There are two basic types of senses. You've got general and special. You also have receptors all throughout your body that are grouped into 5 functional categories depending on what it is they detect. Mechanoreceptors detect pressure. Chemoreceptors detect chemicals. Thermoreceptors detect temperature. Photoreceptors detect light, and nociceptors that detect pain. Receptors are generally grouped into 2 basic categories: naked nerve endings and encapsulated receptors. Naked nerve endings in body tissues detect pain, temperature, and light touch. Generally, it's true that naked nerve endings are more sensitive, so it's important that information about pain gets detected quickly because your body needs to respond to it. Figure A here is an example of naked nerve endings, and that's where you have receptors directly on the dendrites of a sensory neuron that is in the tissue itself. B is an encapsulated receptor, so you have a dendrite of a sensory neuron, and it's surrounded by a layer of cells. So encapsulated receptors are naked nerve endings, but they're surrounded by layers of cells, and they detect pressure as well, light touch, and muscle extension. So this is information that maybe doesn't need to be transmitted to the brain as rapidly. Many receptors stop generating impulses after they are exposed to a specific stimulus for a long period of time, and that's known as something called adaptation. So for example, let's say you put on a shirt in the morning, and initially you're aware that you're wearing a shirt because your mechanoreceptors that respond to light touch are transmitting a signal to your brain about that shirt. But after a while, those receptors are going to adapt to that stimulus, so the stimulus being the shirt on the body, so that your body is not constantly aware of the fact that you're wearing a shirt. There are receptors that don't undergo adaptation, and some of those are muscle stretch receptors and joint proprioceptors. Proprioception is the basic idea of where your body is in space. So it's important for your brain to be aware of where your body is in space as you're undergoing everyday activities. Special senses are taste, smell, vision, hearing, and balance. Starting with taste, the taste buds respond to chemicals that are dissolved in food. They're mostly located on the upper surface of the tongue, and you eat food and you chew it, and the food molecules get dissolved in the saliva, and then from there they bind to the membranes of receptor cells, sending a signal to the brain about taste. Here is a rough picture of that. You can see the tongue and the taste buds, which are largely on the upper surface of the tongue. And if you blow up a taste bud, you can see what happens is the molecules dissolved in the saliva enter in the taste bud through something called a taste pore. And then they interact with receptors there, and the signal is then sent on a sensory nerve fiber up to the brain. Taste buds respond to 5 basic flavors: salty, bitter, sweet, sour, and umami. Taste buds are for the most part, preferentially responsive to one flavor over the other. It used to be believed that your tongue had a basic map, whereas like the tip of your tongue might respond to sweet, whereas the sides of your tongue might respond to sour. But that has since been proven to not be true. So while it is such that most taste receptors have a taste that they'll respond to over another, it's not true that there's a map on your tongue for specific tastes. Moving on to smell now, the olfactory epithelium is a patch of receptors that detect odors, and it's located on the roof of your nasal cavity, and it responds to thousands of different molecules. And what happens is these molecules enter in the nasal cavity, bind to receptors that are located on olfactory hairs, and then an impulse is then sent to the brain about that smell. Interestingly, as you may be aware, smell influences our sense of taste, and then as the reverse is also true, that our sense of taste influences smell. So, for example, if you have a cold and your nose is stuffed up and you can't smell things very well, you might also find that things don't generally taste as good as you might imagine them to. Here is a picture of this. So you have odor molecules that are entering into the nasal cavity, and they come and they bind to receptors located on olfactory hairs. And then you have a bunch of cells that lead to nerve fibers that eventually lead up to the brain. For vision, we have eyes that are spherical organs located in our eye sockets, and the other name for eye socket is orbits. They're attached to the orbit by 6 small muscles that control eye movement. Your eye has 3 layers. The innermost layer is the retina, and that's the light-sensitive layer. The retina has 2 different types of photoreceptors, rods and cones. Rods are important in dim light, and they provide black and white vision, whereas cones are important in bright light and provide color vision. They are also important for visual acuity, so seeing things clearly. There's a whole host of visual problems that have different causes. Nearsightedness results when the eyeball is slightly elongated. And the contrast is farsightedness, where the eyeballs are slightly short. You can also be farsighted if your lens is weak. Astigmatism is a condition where your cornea and lens are slightly malformed or disfigured. Presbyopia is caused by a decline in the resiliency of the lens, so it's not functioning like it should be. And then you have color blindness, which is a hereditary disorder where you can't see certain colors. And there's a whole host of severities where some people can just not see red and green, or some people can't see any color whatsoever. Moving on to hearing, you have the ear. The ear consists of 3 separate portions: outer, middle, and inner. The outer ear has the external canal and the auricle, and those are important because they direct sound down to our eardrum or up to our eardrum. In the middle ear, you have the eardrum and the ossicles, which are 3 small bones, and the ossicles transmit vibrations to the inner ear. The auditory tube takes the pressure, makes the pressure equal inside the ear cavity and outside the ear cavity. Basically what happens is sound waves cause vibrations in the eardrum, which are transmitted to a fluid that's floating in the cochlea, which is part of the ear, and I'll show you a picture of that in a second. These pressure waves caused by the vibrations in the fluid cause this membrane to vibrate that stimulates hair cells. The pressure waves resulting from a sound causes the vibrate to causes one part of the membrane to vibrate, and that causes the hair cells to be stimulated and sends a signal to the brain. So here we have a picture of that. You have the portion that directs sound to the eardrum, and you have the 3 bones, the ossicles, and the cochlea is this sort of round snail-shaped looking thing that's filled with fluid. And when the fluid, the sound waves are transmitted through the fluid that causes a membrane to vibrate, that then causes hair cells to be activated. Hearing loss is one of the main problems that you might find with the ears. 2 main types. You have conduction deafness, where the conduction of sound waves to the inner ear is impaired. That can be like if you rupture your eardrum, or you hurt the bones, the ossicles. And then there's also nerve deafness, and that results in damage results from damage to the hair cells, which are located on the membrane that respond to the vibration, also to the nerve, the vestibulocochlear nerve, or even in the brain in the auditory cortex. That is all we have for module number 10, the senses.